you'll be loaded with many things for which you have no use. But just online there is awesome, right? Just thinking about that. We're loaded, so many times we're loaded, we're bombarded with everything. How much do we really need to know or use or whatever? But last week I started talking about. I said that I come across a saying, and I thought it was really good, and it was, our culture is the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves, and then we forget that they're stories. And I love that statement. And I talked about it last week, and a lot of good things came up, and something that Art said really stimulated this talk today also. But well, you'll see. So I wanted to, and I did want to continue on that, because it's really not just our cultures. It's not just our culture that is the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves and then forget their stories. Our whole lives are the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves, and then we forget their stories, because it's our identity, who we are. They're all stories, many of them from our past. But thinking about the stories that we tell ourselves, there's one story that prevails. When I really gave some thought to thinking about this and doing some investigation and watching this movie that I'm going to talk about here, one thing came up that I think it's in everybody's story. Has a little bit to do in everybody's story. And I want you to think about the news stories that we hear on a daily basis. Now, those are stories, right? They're all stories. And we read those or listen to them or whatever. And one of the things for journalism, they say, if it bleeds, it leads. If it's something gory, something that is really, that'll be on the front page. That'll be the big story for tonight. If it bleeds, it leads. It says if you want readers, go with the gruesome, scary story. That's what gets the heart pumping and grabs attention. But what grabs our attention can also scare the heck out of us and shut us down. And think about the stories, the scary stories that we read or hear or think about on a daily basis. And sometimes we watch movies and TV stories and stuff like that. And they're stories, and we realize they're stories, but still they affect us in some way. So in doing that, think about this. It says a scary story might sell, but it also bombards with our negativity on a daily basis, and some people say, why bother? When you have the scary stories about the economy, the unemployment, the this, the that, can get people down, depressed, and everything. And it says fear stimuli go straight to the brain's amygdala. But this was a Harvard Medical School did this study, but it says hope seems to travel in the same dungeons or the same parts of the brain as fear. It might be a good soldier to employ if we want to meet fear. So think about the stories, and this is all going to come together, but think about the stories that we hear, the stories on the news, and a lot of the stories that we tell ourselves. What does it end up giving us when we say, why bother, or whatever? What does it kind of produce in us?
Lack of hope.
What's that? Lack of hope? Lack of hope?
Apathy.
Apathy?
Anger.
But anger? All negative emotions. And I think probably we can put them all and say, makes us feel powerless. Right? A lot of those things make us feel powerless. When we see things, about the economy, when we see things that are happening even in other parts of the world, we feel powerless. And think about why we feel powerless. Okay, we talked about, about God as power and everything, so why do we feel so powerless? Hope, so we talk about hope. Now, hope and fear, if it goes to the same pathway in the brain, it says hope isn't blind optimism. It's a sense of possibility, delight in a new joy and creativity that characterizes our species. So thinking about powerlessness, I think that's the biggest story that life has given us. When we talk about culture and stories, we are almost trained to feel powerless. If you think about, the stories that we're told from right at the beginning, and what did you say? You don't remember, but you said, when I said about the stories of culture, you said competition versus competitive, competition versus cooperativeness, right? From little on, what kind of stories are we told that can produce the feeling of powerlessness? Power, or a lot of times powerlessness. Competition, right? You have to perform to get you have to be at the top. And if you're not at the top, we don't feel good enough. And it gives a sense of powerlessness. Why bother? I can't do that anyways. It's always about competition. And really, that was based on Darwin's theory. They said that Darwin's theory was the survival of the fittest. And Andrew Carnegie actually brought that into the survival, the success. Everything was the survival of the fittest. It was all about competition. And it's interesting because now people are going back to look at Darwin's what he said. And it's interesting because they're finding a whole different story. That even Darwin wasn't saying that competition is the way. He's saying cooperativeness is the way. So, there's a new theory of human origins that says cooperation, not competition, is instinctive. This is the way, it was always distorted of Darwin's ideas. His 1871 book, The Descent of Man, argued that the human species had succeeded because of traits like sharing and compassion. Those communities, he wrote, which included the greatest number of the most sympathetic members, would flourish best. The rear, the greatest number of offspring. Darwin was no economist, but well-sharing and cooperation have always looked more consistent with his observations about human survival than the uniqueness and hierarchy that dominates contemporary corporate life. So people say, about that the competition, the survival of the fittest, was really the thing that started in Darwin and ended up, that was how you succeed. However, now they're looking back and saying that really was a misinterpretation. Gee, how interesting how people now are looking at the Bible and saying, gee, that might have been a misinterpretation on some of this stuff. But, so when we think about that, not competition, but cooperation is the way that we succeed and the way that we will grow and expand. So if we think about that, how would cooperation change our whole story?
It would make us more in the flow of what we were meant to be.
Exactly. It would take away, think about the sense of powerlessness it would take away. Go ahead.
Well, when you compete, like say in a sport, or there's a winner and a loser, you're competing to win, it's all about ego. But if you work together, everybody wins.
Right,
There doesn't have to be a winner and a loser.
Exactly.
We all winners.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
The other thing I was thinking, it's a shame that tragedy sometimes brings people together in a cooperative way. Like say, just what happened out in Oklahoma. When we have something that's beyond us, like the weather, nobody can control the weather, and some disaster happens or a bomb or something, it seems like all, races and, male, female ages melt away because we all have to work together to rebuild something. And then people realize that together, in that moment of tragedy and sadness, that they realize that, oh wow, like we're working together to build something together and make it whole again.
And that's very interesting that you bring that up, because exactly, we are actually hardwired. We're hardwired to be cooperative. We're not, but yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
But it seems like, the competitiveness is almost like unnatural, because like when something like that happens, if you revert back to what is natural, which is to
Exactly. Yeah.
because everything is all stripped aside, at that point, like when everything is, with the situation with Oklahoma, like the whole structure, in that setting, collapsed. So like they went back to what is natural, which is
Exactly. You go back to what's important. You go back to the inside, to who you are. Exactly. Go back to who you are.
I like to think that if you think of pack animals as animals that are solitary, pack animals like wolves and dogs and so on, they're cooperating. A wolf doesn't take out a large animal by itself. they cooperate as a pack, whereas you have animals that, I think the difference between dogs and cats. Cats are solitary animals, and they just do things on their own, but they are in competition with those others, and they have to have their territory, and cats will defend their territory, but they're solitary animals. Human beings are pack animals. That's what we are.
And it's interesting though, they're doing a lot more studies on animals in the wild. And what they're thinking, or what was already thought of, the stories about the animals and stuff, or what was true about them, they're learning is not really true. You know, they say about the animals, the survival of the fittest. You know, that the leader of the pack make the decisions. You know, the highest one. So they watched some kind of deer. I forget what kind of deer it was. But they graze, and then there's a certain time that they decide to go to a watering hole. And depending on what watering hole they go to, there's certain watering holes they can choose from, and some of them are a distance, some of them are closer, and some of them are bigger, and that kind of thing. And they said it's very important to leave at the right time so that every member can go, because some of the older members, it's harder to get there. You know, some might be dehydrated until they get there, and all this and that. So, you know, it's very important that they leave at the right time. The theory was that it was the leader, the big head honcho with the most horns or whatever, you know, that would lead the pack and make that decision. However, it was incredible because they watched this, and every time they would see the deer raise their head and point in the direction of the watering hole that they wanted to go to. And when the 51st% put their head up and pointed to that direction, the herd automatically went. It was like they knew, instinctive, that that was the vote. It was cooperation. It was like democracy. They said democracy and cooperation is hardwired even into nature. You know, democracy and cooperation is hardwired even into nature. And they said more and more they're finding that, you know, the animals that they thought were survival of the fittest and everything, it's cooperation. You know, even animals that feed on other animals, they'll only take one. They'll only take one. So if you think about competition, why has competition really breeded in our society?
Because ego gets in the way. Ego.
Well, and money and power, because in humans, the guy who finds the watering hole wants to claim it and sell the water. I ain't sharing it with you. You're going to give me a dollar.
Yeah, you're not
Break
too
those
bad.
old monopolies, you know?
Cooperation would eliminate lack of consciousness, whereas if you think about the watering hole and you're going to get money from everybody, that's ego and greed. But if you think, wow, here's some for all of us, no one would have lack of consciousness. Everyone would think, oh, there's enough of everything for everyone.
Right. Because it does. You know, and I love when Charles Fillmore says right here, you know, it says, you will be loaded with many things for which you have no use. You know, so many things. It's like, if you think about, this I watched this, I Am, it's called I Am, and it's by the, and it was made by, a documentary made by the director that did all the, I can't think of his name now, the actor that does Ace Ventura and Liar, Jim Carrey. He did all the Jim Carrey movies, and he made a fortune. And he said, you know, and he talks about his increase of all the, it's Tom Sadak or something like that. He talks about how, you know, he started with nothing, and then he made a little, and he bought this house, then he bought a bigger house, he bought more houses, looking for property and all this stuff. And he had an accident that caused a head injury. And he had a concussion, but he went into a post-concussion syndrome, which it's related to deep depression, losing your will to live, a lot of different things. And he said when he finally came out of this, he started searching for what's wrong with the world and how can we fix it. And I like the I Am, because when he found out what's wrong with the world, I am. That was kind of cool, but you know, it's a movie that has a lot of interviews with different people and stuff, saying, you know, ideas about what they found out is we're all one. And one of the biggest things, think about again, going to powerlessness. Why do we feel powerless? Because we feel separate. Why do we feel that we have to compete? because we feel separate. If we would realize that we're all one, that as I help you, I'm helping myself. As I help push you up, I'm pulling myself up. We would realize the difference between what cooperation and competitiveness is, and we would all be winners. There's a, and I can't think of the, I don't know the word, but there was a word that they called, and I think it was the ancient, I believe it was from the Indians and stuff, and I didn't write it down, but it meant that abundance or accumulation beyond your needs is considered mental illness. Think about that, and think about this. Okay, accumulation beyond your needs is considered mental illness. What happens when somebody gorges themselves and is an overeater? Right? It's an addiction. It's an addiction. You get sick, right? They consider that a mental illness. How about addictions? Too much of a good thing, right? It's a mental illness. However, it's okay to have all of the wealth, all of the houses, all of this. That's fine, right? Is it any different?
I was thinking about that show Hoarding. Like, if you want to really start cleaning, you watch a couple episodes of that.
Yeah. And that is, it is, accumulation. And do you know what? I believe that they hoard because they're afraid of not having enough. They're afraid, that fear of not having enough. And again, it's a different kind of competition, or it's a different kind of fear. They fear they don't have enough, so they keep everything. Yeah?
It seems like with people that they, you know, they're showing on those shows that the addiction to hoarding started at a particular bad point in the person's life, and they were using the hoarding to try to, you know, cover up the lack of love, the fear that they have with them. And when it seems like when they can get the, you know, they bring people in, help them to clean out the house, and they feel loved again, then it's likely that they can stop the hoarding.
And again, why is that? Because it's a feeling of powerlessness.
Right.
It
Fear of
comes up-
loss.
Yeah, and you know, loss, all of those things can relate to you feel powerless. Now, if we think we're separate, and we think that we're alone, of course we're gonna feel powerless. I mean, to think that I have to do everything on my own, it's a powerless feeling. But when you realize that we're all one, we're all connected, we're all together, that just totally takes that away, because we're here to help each other. I did a memorial service on Friday morning for someone that took her own life, unfortunately, because of a feeling of powerlessness. You know, when I talked to her family and everything else, she felt powerless. I thought, that's so sad to get to that point. However, how many people feel that way in their life and don't get to that point, but they live on feeling that way of powerlessness? You know, and we promote that. We promote, you know, we promote competition. We promote competition by, you know, all the team stuff, the rah-rah. We promote competition all the time in business and everything else. You know, we promote accumulation of things and competition instead of cooperation.
It seems like that's more looking forward to where I'm going than from where I came from. Like if you're focused on making $1 billion and working 7 days a week, you're forgetting about where you came from and where you're instead just looking at where you're headed, where you want to end up.
And what happens when we're into competition too, is you said it almost, we work 7 days a week. A lot of times we forget what's really important.
And we have our first heart attack.
Yeah.
And then we develop cancer. Right?
Yeah, basically. Because, and it's all goes by the story that was misinterpreted, right? The first story that was misinterpreted from Darwin's writings, the survival of the fittest, it's about competition. You know, it was misinterpreted, and we're living this story now, you know, and reaping the rewards of something that was misinterpreted. And it's not the way to live.
Our governments, our militaries, competition. On that, you're just a one striker. democratic republic division,
Everything,
separation.
right, everything is about competition instead of cooperation.
The Soviet Union made 1,000 nuclear missiles in the 80s, so we had to make 2,000, and then they had to have 5,000. We had 10,000.
We were
Yeah,
always
yeah.
7 years ahead of them, but we didn't tell them.
Right.
And it's like, you know, some of the other countries, when you think about, you know, how can they do that? I think sometimes, how can they do everything when they help their citizens to go to college, when they help them with medical care and stuff? How can they do everything? How can other countries do everything? And then it came to me, yeah, they don't have all their money in missiles and, you know, defenses and stuff like that. So, if we talk about powerlessness, okay, it stems, think about our powerlessness stems from our idea that we're separate. Our idea that we're separate and that we have to get ahead. We have to get ahead of the other guy. You know, we can't cooperate. It's all competition. It's us getting ahead of the other guy. Stepping on him, whatever needs to be done. So, as they're doing these studies on nature and everything and finding out that really it's not about competition in nature but about cooperation, they're finding also in human beings, and this goes along with what Joy said, is there's something that we have in our brains that's called the mirror neuron. And what it says is that we feel what another person feels. And that is where we get to compassion. And unfortunately for some, it takes something like Oklahoma. You know, it takes something like 9/11 to really get in touch with that. However, that's there on a daily basis if we don't have it covered up. You know, we can choose to identify with either the competition, or we can choose to identify with what's in our heart. Just like Ron said, go back to our natural being. And our natural being is we're hardwired to be compassionate. We're hardwired to cooperate. You know, we're not hardwired to compete. That's not, you know, we're hardwired to succeed and move forward, but we're hardwired to do that in a cooperative way. You know, we have taken everything and looked at it as being wrong. And I know, you know, Jesus says, love your enemies. You know, don't fight, don't compete, don't push against. And, you know, I know at class somebody said, I don't know what the question was, and I said, I think if Jesus would be here right now, he'd say, you got me all wrong. You got me all wrong, and things that I said. You know, but it's about cooperation. It's about love. And what do we think about when we think about cooperation? We think about going back to love. And that's what it's all about. It's all about love.
If you think about, for example, the places that you worked, the jobs that were most enjoyable were the ones where everybody was in a cooperative mood. There was not the backbiting, you know, that going on. Those were that, and how much money you made was not the important thing. It was the atmosphere of the loving together work every day.
Yeah. And it is, and you know, it's realizing that being cooperative, we still everybody just makes more money. You know, it's still, because we have this fear, again, we have this fear that we're separate. And I have to do my thing and not worry about what you're doing. Because I have to look out for myself. Not realizing it's all backwards. Go ahead, Sid.
When I lived in Reading, I used to love a big snowstorm when nobody could get out.
Yes.
Because I could walk out my door, all the neighbors would be out cooperatively, shoveling our streets, shoveling our cars, and that was the only time you could walk maybe 2 blocks to the store or whatever, and everyone said hello. Any other time, your neighbors like maybe said hello.
Wow.
And then after all sidewalks were clear, they pelted you with snowballs. You know?
The sense of community, I loved it. I was like, oh, everybody's going to be out. I could go see neighbors. And it was fun to me that we were all stuck there because everybody was kind.
It's like a holiday when that happens.
It was.
Yes.
Everybody just slowed down.
And
It was nice
and
to each other.
that's what we're hardwired. That's why it feels so good. Because we're hardwired to be compassionate. We're hardwired to be kind. And what happened to, buddy, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I do. United States, we have corporations, have always at this point, but they're changing competition. There is a community in the northwest part of Spain called, in English it's called Mondragon. Mondragon. A priest started the cooperative in 1957. They employed 87,000 people. That network of businesses all underneath an umbrella. They never fire anybody. No one's unemployed in that company. They have marvelous retirement and health benefits. They're thriving. The unemployment rate in Spain right now is 25%. Mondragon has no unemployment. Isn't that amazing? Because they're working in a cooperative. They own the company. Each week they have a monthly meeting. Every associate, including the toilet cleaner, has a decision-making process in that company. The CEO only makes 6.5 times more salary than the toilet cleaner. So you don't have that big gap, rich, poor. It's marvelous. It's working. And it's working. And we need to do that here and throughout the world. Cooperate.
And I think once we get to a cooperation, and you know, even kindness is cooperation, it's compassion, showing compassion. And I know in this movie, towards the end, he interviewed his own father, who was, since the movie was made, he passed on, he made his transition, but he was one of the stars of St. Jude with Danny Thomas. And you know, he said about, and everybody, and it was unfortunate because everybody that he interviewed said, well, I don't see that ever happening now, you know. So, but we gotta look differently. We have to look differently. And he said, you know, I go to a wonderful church. I go to a church that the feeling is so energetic. It's so, you know, alive. It's so full of love, compassion, acceptance. He said, we hug and we exchange the peace of Christ. He said, you know, we have whites, we have blacks, we have Hispanics, we have, you know, everybody. And we do that, we hug, we embrace. And he said, this is filled, you know, filled with joy, filled with love. And then we walk out those doors. And he said, we greet each other in the grocery store and, you know, it's like a hi, or maybe we don't even notice each other. You know, all of those things. Why can't we take what we feel here out those doors? And I think about when we did the kindness week and how we put the quarters in the parking meter. And I thought, you know what, Nancy, you're a part of this too. How many times do I get out and I look for my change? Do I have enough? Okay, I go in, I put it, I find out, okay, I have a couple of extra quarters left. What do? Put them back in my pocket. When I could see the next person pulling in and go and put them in his parking meter. You know, how awesome would something like that be? Because they talk in here, they talk, you know, on Yes Magazine, from Yes Magazine online and stuff. It talks about how when people see an act, it produces them to do the same act. It pumps up that compassion, you know, it enlivens that mirror neuron. It enlivens that. You know,
Yes Magazine is great. Everybody should subscribe to it.
It
It's
is,
a marvelous magazine.
Yes.
Yeah.
No advertisements.
Yeah, it is. It's very good. So, you know, it's a matter of, you know, it's up to us. We have a part in it. You know, we can say, yeah, that's right, that's what's wrong with the world. You know, and the thing is, you know, it's up to us. The power of one person, because we're not just one person. We're not just one person. When we realize that we are a whole, you know, we are a whole ourselves, and what we do affects everybody else. Our decision to change and to show that compassion, to think out of love, to work out of cooperation instead of competition. You know, how that's going to change everybody else. Because we're all connected. Entanglement. You know, entanglement, we're all connected. The mirror neuron, other people see us. And, you know, all these studies show so many different ways that prove that we're not powerless. We're powerless by ourselves. But when we realize that we're not separate, that we're not by ourselves, that's where we get our power.
I think, you know, we're talking about compassion, okay, and working together. It seems that when each one of us are open for different ideas that we didn't used to have, we get rid of some of the limiting ideas as it seems that it's time to, and open for the new ideas, that's the I am within us. And we can also ask for that I am to take care of us when it's necessary, you know, and to give us those ideas when it's necessary. Sometimes it's rather tricky, challenging to let go of some of those ideas. But that, when we do, and we ask for that I am, and that's when we can merge together.
Exactly.
And maybe we don't take the other person, so like me, their idea, my idea. I think that helps a little bit, and to realize that the I am isn't this big thing outside, it's just the higher concept of me.
Right. And you know, when we let go of those things, what we're letting go again is our stories. So if we think about that statement again, the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, and then we forget their stories.
It's
You know,
not
we take
always
that as
easy,
the
though.
truth.
Sometimes
We take
it
it as
is,
the
and
truth.
sometimes it
Because
isn't.
we want to bring everything
There's
with us.
a time
And it's a fear, and it's a fear again of powerlessness. And it's interesting, and I love this, you know, at the end, he had all these houses and stuff like that. He got rid of everything, he's living in a trailer park, and he said, you know what, he's happier now than he ever was. And he said, he realized that the first big house that he bought, he stood in the vestibule after all the movers left and brought his artwork in and everything else, and he stood there and he said, I'm not any more happy than I was before. You know, but it's a meaning of life, and it's getting back to our nature, just like Ron said, who we are. It's connecting with who we are, our true nature, what we're hardwired to do. Definitely.
There was several years ago now, a book called Celestine Prophecy. And the next book that came out was the 10th, and I can't think
The
of it.
10th insight.
This 10th.
The
10th insight, yeah.
Yeah, and that insight was the fact of cooperation, where people tried to set up a corporation or something, and then the others on the outside, instead of trying to keep them out, because they thought they were going to come in and try and take over, they invited them in and found that they had some pretty good ideas. And by inviting them in, instead of trying to push them out, it made it all the much better.
Yes.
So that was the 10th instance.
Yep. Charles Fillmore, continuing that chapter 8 reading, he said, once I read of a man who committed a crime, and in his pocket was found a newspaper clipping describing almost identically the same criminal act. His crime was a fruit of suggestion. How many such suggestions does one large newspaper carry to its thousands of readers in its recital of the daily horrors that make up our news? Think of the opposite. You know, if we start focusing on asking the newspaper to print the good stories, the stories of compassion, the stories of kindness, you know, we might find people doing kind acts with that newspaper clipping of somebody else doing a kind act in their pocket, saying that moved me, because it will. It'll touch our nature. It'll touch who we truly are, and it'll activate that mirror neuron and make us want to do the same thing. But he says, as the world comes more and more under the spiritual laws, editors and publishers will not ask their readers what they want. They will give them what they should have for mental food. And as the people are raised to higher planes of consciousness, they will demand reading and uplifting character. They will be just as careful as regards to what they read as they were in the beginning to be a reference of food. There will be the same demand for pure reading as it was for pure food. If it is against the law of land of adulterated food, how much more is it against the law of right thinking to adulterate the truth? We can see the necessity of order and law according to spirit. If we would demonstrate health, every bad thought should be kept out of our mental atmosphere even more carefully than harmful elements are kept out of our natural or material food. And you know, he goes on to talk about again about the oneness. You know, we're all one. What I do affects you. You know, and we can't get away from that. We can't think that, you know, me accumulating everything is not gonna affect somebody else. You know, it's a matter of our daily needs. So, you know, think about, let's, when we walk out of here, think about how we can act in a more cooperative way. How we can stimulate that compassion and feel how good it feels. Because as we do that, we're gonna see other people follow too. And that's the way we're gonna start the revolution. Right? The kindness revolution, you know, the positive revolution. So, I'd like to take these thoughts into meditation. And as we go into meditation, I invite you to get comfortable in your seat. Just feel the seat supporting your body, floor supporting your feet. Feel the energy of this room. Feel the love and the compassion and the cooperation of sharing. That was just perfect. For as I share ideas with you, you share ideas with me. As we share what we have, we don't lose anything, but we gain. As we sit here, I invite you to get into that sense of oneness. That knowing that we are not alone. We are all connected. And in our connection is where our power is. For as we connect and meet with that higher consciousness, the I am. God energy, that divine substance that will meet every need. I ask you to bring into mind the time when you showed cooperation, when you showed compassion, when you showed kindness, or when it was shown to you. Feel the feelings that stimulates. Feelings of gratitude, feelings of joy, feelings of love. The feelings of truly being a winner. Out of cooperation and not competition. As we hold on to these feelings, make a commitment to live from these feelings. As we walk out that door, not only express those here, but every day of our life. Think about how we can be more cooperative, how we can show more compassion, how we can truly live more from love. And as we do this, know that we are making a big impact in changing our world. For as I change myself, change the entire world around me. And so it is. I invite you to hold on to these feelings, and as you come back into this room, know that you are powerful beyond belief. When you are connected with the flow of life and the higher self. share a story, and I didn't get my story, and I forgot to share my story. So I'm going to share my story, The Ass and the Mule. A muleteer set forth on a journey, driving before him an ass and a mule, both well laden. The ass, as long as he traveled along the plain, carried his load with ease, but when he began to ascend the steep path of the mountain, he felt his load to be more than he could bear. He entreated his companion to relieve him of the small portion that he might carry home the rest, but the mule paid no attention to his request. The ass shortly afterwards fell down dead under his burden. Not knowing what else to do in so wild a region, the muleteer placed upon the mule the load carried by the ass in addition to his own, and at the top of all placed the hide of the ass after he had skinned him. The mule, groaning beneath the heavy load, said to himself, "I am treated according to my deserts. If I had only been willing to assist the ass a little in his needs, I should not now be bearing together with his burden himself as well." You know, kind of, that's an Aesop's fable, but you know, we do reap the rewards of our of our doings, and when we cooperate, we all win in the end. And if we don't, we'll reap those rewards also in the end. So, you know, it's cooperation.